I'm Dorothy Reiss, and I came here in 1969 to teach a math course. And in 1970, I was actually asked to teach data processing. It was called data processing at the time, not any of these computer information systems or computer science. That all came much later.
How did you find out that there was even a college in Manchester in the late 60s?
I was a student at UConn. I was finishing my master's degree in biomedical engineering. And I actually don't remember. There was somehow I became aware of an opening in the teaching area. So I came and applied.
Do you remember who interviewed you?
Fred Ramey spoke with me. Dean Fenton, who was here at the time, he was one of our teachers.
And did they offer you a job right on the spot?
Almost. It was very different back then. I didn't have to go through everything that you go through these days. Much more laid back. And Fred Ramey, yes, he was impressed with me after he spoke to me. And then I got to meet the new president at the time.
Okay. So when you taught your first course, what campus did you teach on?
I actually taught over at Harford Road. And in addition to teaching at Harford Road, I had several courses that I did off campus at the Vernon Satellite and some other places. And one of the things that sticks in my mind is at the time I had a computer course with 50 students. And these were over at Vernon. And I convinced Fred Ramey to let me take just one computer. After all, this was a computer course. We had no computers for these students. So I was allowed to actually carry through the snow and ice one computer to the Vernon Satellite location. I used to split the class up, so I had 25 students standing all behind me so that I could demonstrate the types of things that I was teaching. And then they'd sit down and work on something, and I'd have the other 25 standing behind me.
So you were in Vernon, and what was the Harford Road campus like? Did you have an office there?
Yes, I did. I shared an office with Dean Fenton, and I remember my very first days. I had no idea how to use a mimeograph machine. I was in my young 20s, and so security here actually thought I was one of the students. They used to ask to see my ID. But I remember the ceilings being just so high. And Janine and Ilse Hahn helping me with the mimeograph machine.
Janine was?
Janine Welch. She was a secretary to Fred Ramey as well as Ilse Hahn.
Both secretaries to Ramey? Ramey?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What were the students like in the late 60s and early 70s? I mean, many of them were probably older than you were.
Yes, definitely. That's another recollection. My very first algebra class, I was pregnant for my first child at the time, and I was actually very frightened to start teaching. And I sat behind the desk and called the names of every student in the class and felt so comfortable behind the desk that I couldn't get myself to stand up for I don't know how many minutes. I had folks in that class who could have been my parents or grandparents. So that was a very new experience for me.
Do you think any of the students were really startled to see someone so young teaching?
I did have very interesting interactions with many of the students because of my age. Mm-hmm. And that actually continued right up until I retired in 2003.
Now, were you at all involved in any of the extracurricular activities that the college was doing?
Yes, I was on, if you mean several committees and such, yes. I was on several committees. Some of the things that I remember contributing to, one was it was called UID at the time, Universal Instructional Design. And the University of Connecticut had been given a grant. They were one of maybe 20 colleges nationwide. And we were a satellite location to work with them. And I had been on that committee, and part of my method in teaching involved having the students be excited and problem solve and do different things. And my background in, for example, archaeology lent towards my presenting the material in a certain way. They weren't familiar with the fact that eventually we were starting to put things online. They had no idea how to even access the information about MCC. So as a result of having done that, the University of Connecticut had me up as their very first person on their webpage. This might have been about 11 years ago when all of this started. And then one of the other committees, I was on the Academic Standards Committee when I was very young, and then again much later on. And our grading system that we have now is due to my efforts. I looked at about 25 different colleges, and I did not like the way the grades were distributed point-wise. We had too much of a difference, for example, between something like a B and a B plus or a B and a B minus. So after looking at 25 different colleges and presenting this to our faculty, it was approved, and so it stands today. And this way students who transfer to other schools will be on more of an equal footing with those students.
Now, you were here when the college constructed the East Campus. What was it like moving into that facility?
Yeah, before we moved, I remember actually having to drive. We had only about 10 minutes between classes, and I would be driving from Harford Road over to that campus. I enjoyed that campus very much because I'm very much of an outdoors person, and everybody felt so comfortable there. When I would teach summer courses, I'd actually hold part of the class outdoors. I enjoyed our poetry readings and other things we did there.
Who were some of the people who made an impression on you in terms of your colleagues back in the, say, the 1970s?
I was impressed with, I believe it was President Lowe. I remember we had golf lessons, and he took golf lessons, and just a very nice person, very, very honest, decent, respectful. Colleagues, I learned a lot, believe it or not, from Louis Vismontis. He was here probably back in the 60s because, like I say, I came in 1969. And he actually approached me, and he had come to know me at one of the satellite locations through our office hours being shared. So he approached me and asked if I would apply, that there was an opening at the college. And so I did. And he meant a lot to me. He just taught me different things. He was like a mentor.
Can you recall any funny stories or funny incidents from those days?
I remember there was a time where I suspected that some of my male students were cheating on a test, and I was very strong-willed, and I was not going to let that go unproven. So I actually went into the boys' room because I had a feeling that they left their materials in there. And sure enough, I looked under all the stalls and in the garbage can and behind, and I did find the materials that they were using when they would ask to leave the room. So.
And were they surprised when you confronted them with the evidence?
Yep, they definitely were. Yep.
Now, obviously, you were at the college in about 1984 when the Low Building opened up. Did you move to the Low Building or teach in the Low Building during that period?
Yeah, I definitely moved to the Low Building, and that was a major change. I requested at the time when I was department head for the DP department that I have a particular office which had a nice window and was next to some of the other deans and division directors and such at the time, and I actually got it. So that was very meaningful to me, and it was the move from that Low Building up to this new campus that was quite a shock because I was in an office that had no windows at all. So what I used to do was do my preparations and correct my papers in empty classrooms. I'd go and sit by windows and leave my office because of that. But I remember being able to move furniture, and back then, as I say, things were just more free. We actually moved the furniture from the low building, or from the lower campus, I guess it was, up to the low building through the windows. We opened windows and were able to move the truck right in front of the window. And that was pretty special.
Were you still working full-time when this campus opened?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, I only retired in 2003, and I've been teaching part-time ever since, actually. So I've experienced all of these rooms and buildings.
So what is it like to reflect back? Obviously you teach in this facility now, and you can go all the way back to the Harford Road campus and the Vernon satellite. What goes through your mind when you reflect upon that?
The major change in technology, and along with that, probably the size. Of course, we have many more teachers, we have many more courses, and we have many more students. And back when it was smaller, it was very much like a family. We would come back in the fall after being away all summer, and everybody would be hugging everybody else. We just felt so close. And of course, some of that was compromised as we got into the larger buildings. But the technology, of course, was wonderful. Again, there was a time where I had about 50 students, and I had maybe only 10 or fewer computers for all of those students. And one of my students was a quadriplegic, confined to a wheelchair, and could only touch the keyboard with a particular wand that had a rubber at the end. And so I actually customized his wheelchair for him so that he could carry something along with him to make that easier. So we went from, situations where maybe 10 to 20 students would have to share one computer to not only students having their own computer right now, but also being able to have open lab space and time. So that was a big change. When I was in college, I used a slide rule. There were no such things as calculators, and I show my math students slide rules today because they have no idea such things existed. And now I'm part of an experiment, in a sense, in the math department, which involves the students using an ALEX software program. So they are able to work at their own pace. The program software tests them, it grades them, and that's majorly different from the way it used to be.
So you've seen quite a few changes.
Oh, yes, many changes.
If you were talking with someone who had just been hired to begin his or her teaching career at MCC, what advice would you give to that person?
Just beginning their teaching. Well, since I have grown over all of these years, I would say that I'm more patient and more understanding, and there are reasons for students of all ages being what they are. And so I think I would very much address that. I would give them an indication as to what kinds of students to expect. It's a very different community from four-year schools, let's say, where the students are housed on campus. Here, through all my years, I have found students who have such unbelievable responsibilities with siblings, with catastrophes at home, working. So, for example, in my counseling years, I used to try to advise students to take only so many courses. So things like this, I would try to make new faculty aware of. And maybe even, as Louis Vismontis did for me, some of the things that might be expected of them, things that they can get involved with that would lead eventually to promotion and more security here, besides the enjoyment of being part of that community.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I was thinking back. There was a time where I chose to help a publishing company, and I remember creating over 3,000 test questions for their student edition. I also did the test bank for their book. And at the time, as I suggested earlier, I enjoyed doing things differently when I would teach. And so I came up with a whole different kind of test question, which they really, really appreciated. And so this became part of their new book. And this was sold nationwide, so that's something that I like to think back to. A lot of work. I used to have 10 minutes between classes, and I would be typing in the questions and then running off to another class. Those were very busy days.
You were very much an audience for a number of events. I remember you with your young kids going in to see a play or a concert or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe any of those experiences at all?
Taking part, in other words, in many, many things
Going
here.
to see them. Yeah, I'm thinking of your, the family related to the college, I think is what I'm talking
Well, one of the things that I'm remembering right now is when we used to give awards to some of our top students in the computer areas. So I actually went out into the public and got certain businesses to provide some of those awards and then presented those to deserving students. So that was very special.